Hi, everyone. Judge Andrew Napolitano here for Judging Freedom. Merry Christmas to you. From my heart to yours, from our team to your family. Here's a special of the best of Judging Freedom during 2023 that our team has put together for you. I hope you like it. Does the government of Prime Minister Netanyahu still plan to wipe the Palestinians off the planet? And does that government understand the harm to Israel of this ferocious assault on civilians?
Yeah. So Israel is stating that as its policy. That's true. But they do not have the ability to execute it. And so what we have seen is that Hamas has effectively attacked Israeli forces. And they're going to suffer casualties that, frankly, Israel cannot sustain. They will recognize that they're not willing to lose this number of troops in a face-to-face battle with Ukraine, not Ukraine, with Hamas. And it's sad because there are soldiers dying on both sides, but the Israelis are suffering casualties they cannot sustain. That's the point. That
and Larry,
Israel
there's
has a low tolerance.
There's no mention in the Western press of these casualties. McGovern and Crook's sources are people in Israel and in the Israeli press, but you don't see this in the New York Times or the Washington Post or the Wall Street Journal or Fox News or any of the mainstream media around here.
Right. No, this is part of that information warfare. As long as you don't report it, it doesn't happen. But the reality is it's happening. And Hamas, in this 2-week peace process with the ceasefire, they prepared ambushes. They've killed Israeli soldiers going into the tunnels. They have prepared ambushes above ground. Israel is suffering significant losses. And what's horrific about this is that Israel is killing Palestinian civilians without regard for the fact that it's killing civilians. They're justifying it that, we're killing Hamas fighters. And yet, in none of these videos are we seeing bodies being drug out where a guy is hanging on to a gun, hanging on to a anti-tank guided missile. We're not seeing that. We're seeing babies. We're seeing women. We're seeing toddlers. And those images are resonating over the internet, over Telegram, over the social media channels. It's enraging the world. And Israel, no matter what it says, is losing the propaganda battle in this regard.
Here's Alistair this morning on Judging Freedom, talking about Hamas killing IDF soldiers.
And at the same time, we've seen increase of attacks by Hamas on the Israelis. 60 Israelis have died in an ambush. I'm not sure that it's exactly 60, but it's certainly round about 60. It's reported in the Israeli press that it's 60.
Is that a significant number, Alistair? 60 Israeli soldiers killed in an ambush?
In one incident, yes. 60 is quite big for one incident. They put bombs all around and the Israelis walked into it, and then they finished them off with automatic rifle fire. But there've been others. The Israelis have been killed in tunnels. They've laid traps, taken them into tunnels, and then collapsed the tunnels on them. And in the north, there's been heavy fighting.
Have you read that in any newspapers, Larry?
Yeah. Alistair is, he really is an extraordinary person, and his wife, Ashlyn. He is a gentleman, but he is an intelligence professional. He's not fabricating facts. He does not have an intent to try to create a narrative just to serve some sort of ulterior motive.
If you became president, what's the very first action you would take? Also, my wife would like to know how you keep your hair so perfect. By this, I do this all day, every day, not in front of the camera. If I did this on set at Fox with the camera on me, they'd take me off air for a week, even though I think it's kind of funny that I'm doing it in front of a camera. What's the first action that I would take as president of the United States? I would refuse to fund the Central Intelligence Agency. I would shut it down. Yeah, all right, so I'm ready to... This little guy, what is he doing?
Good morning, Christopher.
He's cuddling at Daddy's feet. Okay, I'm ready for this.
I'm rolling. You just go anytime you're ready.
This Christmas season, as your... Why would anybody say pounding down potatoes and gravy unless you're... That's the way you eat. What is the value of Secretary Blinken's diplomacy? He spent 4 days and seems to have achieved nothing. Now, listen, we both know the way diplomacy works. They don't always announce immediately what they've agreed to, but the King of Jordan wouldn't see him. Bibi Netanyahu rebuffed him. I don't know what he said to President Abbas of the Palestinian Authority, but it seems to me that these guys are not successful diplomats.
No, they're really jokes of diplomats. And in fact, the latest funny thing is from Blinken is I had several things that I told Prime Minister Netanyahu, and one of them was maybe he could drop smaller bombs on Gaza. Smaller bombs. That was his State Department advice. So that's a sign of somebody that has nothing.
Did somebody actually say that in public, Karen?
Blinken was quoted saying that he had several things he asked him to do. Perhaps we can use smaller weapons, and not bunker busters. He didn't say not bunker busters. He said smaller weapons.
They dropped 6 2,000-pound bombs, which are pretty big. You know this better than I. You're an Air Force veteran. On a refugee camp to kill one Hamas guy.
Right. This is in violation of proportionality and other historical rules of war. If there are rules of war, they're certainly in violation of it. But yeah, we don't have any credibility over there, I don't think, in any of the countries. And we certainly have no influence over Netanyahu's government or any Israeli government. And from an Israeli perspective, that's a good thing. You don't want to be controlled by another country. But from an American perspective, given the billions and billions and billions of dollars spent both in DC and given to Israel, you would expect that we would have influence, and we have none. That has been, as one of our senators, that's a very poor investment.
Here's a person whose image you will recognize. This is from 2013, predicting with a remarkable clarity just what we're seeing today.
Netanyahu now, I believe, has decided unequivocally to move to a one-state solution, which every one of his predecessors in the prime ministership have condemned as a disaster for Israel. And I think Israel is now moving toward a disaster for itself, and insisting that all the way from the Jordan River to the Mediterranean Sea has to be Israeli controlled. That is a mistake.
How prescient and how decent President Carter was on this issue all along.
And how things don't change.
Well,
I mean,
Netanyahu.
It's almost as if he's not in the physical condition that he's in, and he's talking about what happened yesterday.
No, this is exactly correct. And Netanyahu has been on this line, and anyone that watches this has known that Israel, in this current dispensation of an extreme right-wing government, is out to do anything possible to stop peace based on 2 states.
You and I and the folks that watch us regularly have been fascinated with the propaganda and the role of the media. And there are certain things that you and I know happened, and I get most of this from Colonel McGregor, our friend and colleague, that you don't see too much of in the media. There has been a seizure of an Israeli vessel in the eastern Mediterranean. There have been strikes on U.S. bases in Iraq and Syria. What are we doing in Iraq and Syria? There have been more than 1,000 Hezbollah missiles filed into northern Israel. The IDF has fired sophisticated weaponry 25 miles into Lebanon. There's a hot war going on in the West Bank, and there's a flotilla of 1,000 Turkish commercial vessels making their way towards Israeli ports. You don't see any of that in the Wall Street Journal or the New York Times or the Washington Post.
And it's incredibly important. And if this was a movie or a Netflix TV series, right, this would be where the season ends, right? Right. I mean, with all this, with everything that's occurring here,
right,
with all the possibilities where my God, what could the outcomes be if this does occur? And, so again, the need to talk, the need to negotiate, not to give the other side an excuse or a reason or a necessity, because all nations are bound, political leaders are bound by the same necessities. They have their own domestic political pressures that they have to respond to. So the idea that Hamas would never have launched an October 7th style attack based upon their constituency being kept in an open air concentration camp is just, the inevitability of not understanding that inevitability is the same as not understanding or how predictable the Israeli response was going to be.
Switching gears before we close, do you sense a gap between President Biden and Prime Minister Netanyahu over the president's ability either to justify or be indifferent about the slaughter, the absolute slaughter going on in Gaza at the hands of the Israeli Defense Forces?
I think Europeans look at President Biden and they see a living metaphor for what has happened to us as a nation. They see us as on a very steep decline. We no longer control our borders. We don't control immigration. We don't suppress criminality. The United States has become a society in free fall. We don't even know who we are. We don't have an identity. We stand by and watch as the federal government and its armed supporters and the civil populace deface monuments and tear down monuments, destroy our heritage, our culture, our history. Europeans watch this and they say, well, it looks like the Americans are finished. And at the same time, if you look at someone like Olaf Scholz, who is now wants to declare emergency conditions in Germany on the grounds that Germany has to be ready to fight Russia, which is, of course, laughable. In reality, he's trying to prepare his regime to suppress opposition to it inside Germany. That is appalling, but that's where he's headed. I wouldn't be surprised if Mr. Macron doesn't end up in the same position. All of these governments in the West are going to be swept away. They're finished. They're done. Their populations have had it with them. They are going to be replaced, but they're not going to be replaced by the people or people like the individuals that are currently governing Western Europe or this country.
All right. Before Joe Biden is replaced, what do you think will happen if Netanyahu asks him for American ground troops in Gaza?
Well, I think if
or in the West Bank, which I think would be more likely the request.
I don't know about that. I think the Israelis can cope with the West Bank as well as Gaza. The area where they're going to have more difficulty is the northern front facing Hezbollah. I mean, if you look at Hezbollah, its capabilities, the forces it can field, it makes Hamas look like a volunteer fire department.
From Andrew L. Will you interview RFK? Please get his head right on Israel because he is good on everything else. Andrew L., I could not agree with you more. Bobby is a friend of mine through his brother Doug, with whom I was privileged to work for many years at Fox. Doug Kennedy is the outlier of the clan because Doug is the Kennedy who's the libertarian. He doesn't mind me saying this. Doug is Bobby's younger brother. I did interview Bobby once about a year ago. He and I text each other often about Israel. We do disagree, as you know, but I would love to have Bobby back on. I think Bobby stands for a level of individual freedom and governmental restraint unknown in the modern era, even unknown under Ronald Reagan. And I think Bobby's going to have an outsized influence. I don't think he's going to get elected president, but I think he's going to have an outsized influence in the 2024 election.
Policy since Netanyahu took over. Indeed, probably since Ronald Reagan had to really bash the Israelis when they went into Lebanon in 1982. But it's certainly been their policy since Netanyahu took over. He is the most draconian leader Israel has had in its short history since 1948.
How do you see
he is de Fuhrer. He is de Fuhrer.
Wow. How do you see this ending in Gaza? Do you see other international players coming in to save the Palestinian people? Do you see the Israelis taking over Gaza, making it part of Greater Israel, doing the same with the West Bank? Do you see Turkey, Egypt, Jordan animated to do something? Do you see Western Europe doing anything? Or is Bibi unleashed to kill whoever he wants and steal whatever he wants?
I wish I could say I think what you're saying will eventually come about, but I go back to Hannah Arendt and her phrase, the banality of evil.
Tell me about the intelligence community. Surely Russian intelligence knows how much longer the Ukraine military can last without U.S. aid. Surely it knows how much U.S. aid President Zelensky has requested. Surely it knows how little U.S. aid President Zelensky is getting. Am I giving the Russian intelligence too much credit, or is it common knowledge in the intelligence community that the Russians know the desperate straits that the Ukrainian government and military are in as we speak?
Of course they do. I would say that the Russians are present in Kiev in equivalent numbers to what the U.S. is present. They have contacts. They know what's going on in Ukraine. They know that Ukraine has lost. Question is whether Joe Biden and the acolytes around him realize that it's lost. It's hard to think that they don't realize that, but they're going to keep this going as long as they can, so they're not embarrassed before the election. That's a fool's errand, in my view.
I want to play a clip that you sent us early this morning, Ray. This is Avril Haines, who's the DNI, the Director of National Intelligence, the nominal head of the government's acknowledged and publicly known 17 intelligence agencies. Maybe there's more, who knows? Another story for another time, but of the field of your expertise. But we'll play Ms. Haines, and then I'm anxious to hear your thoughts on it.
How quickly is Russia burning through its military stockpiles of munition?
I think I can give you precise numbers in this fora, but quite quickly. I mean, it's really pretty extraordinary. And our own sense is that they are not capable of indigenously producing what they are expending at this stage. So that is going to be a challenge, and that's why you see them going to other countries effectively to try to get ammunition. And of course, we've indicated that their precision munitions are running out much faster in many respects. They have a lot of stockpiles. How viable those stockpiles are, how much they have, what they can use in different conflicts are obviously all questions that we look at quite carefully with our allies and partners.
Is this credible, Ray?
No, it's incredible. It was incredible last December, a year ago, when she said those things. I mean, if I were Biden and I were Compass Mentis, I would get rid of these clowns.
First of all, the Israelis only control about 40% of Gaza. Just think about it. They control 40%. That means the other 60% is territory where Hamas can go and the Israelis can't get at them. Second, the Israelis have not captured any hostages. That's quite surprising. If they haven't captured any hostages, that probably tells you a lot about their ability to find the Hamas fighters. Furthermore, if you look at the number of people that the Israelis have killed, the number is about 20,000, as you said before. And most people agree that about 70% of that 20,000 is women and children. So that would be 14,000. That means that the Israelis have killed 6,000 males. Now, those 6,000 males were certainly not all Hamas fighters. Most of them, I'm sure, were innocent civilians. So let's say of the 6,000, 4,000 were civilians and 2,000 were Hamas fighters. I don't think that's the likely number, but let's give the Israelis the benefit of the doubt. That says that they've killed 2,000 Hamas fighters. Well, most people argue that Hamas had 30 to 40,000 fighters to start with. If they had 30 to 40,000 fighters and they've killed 2,000, that means they have a whole heck of a lot of fighters left.
The GOP primary, Fox News opened a debate between Democrat Newsom, that's Gavin Newsom, the governor of California, and Republican DeSantis, that's Ron DeSantis, the governor of Florida. Looks like media propaganda. What's your opinion on that debate? Thanks and Godspeed. My opinion on that debate is that my friends and former colleagues were looking for ratings. And now we won't know what the ratings were. They come out at, this is odd, at 12 minutes after 4 in the afternoon, East Coast time, every weekday afternoon, and we'll find out then what the ratings were. But this is really the undercard as things now stand. I know Ron DeSantis. I've known him for many years, but his campaign is floundering. Every time he opens his mouth, he loses votes. And I know Gavin Newsom. He's married to my former colleague, or was married to my former colleague, Kimberly Guilfoyle, who's now engaged to Donald Trump Jr. No, you can't make this up. But one of my first assignments when I left the bench and started in television was to cover a murder trial in California. And there were 2 young prosecutors prosecuting this murder trial. The murder weapon was a vicious dog, a known vicious dog that the state of California had indicted a guy for putting upon his neighbor whom he hated, and the dog killed the neighbor. The prosecutorial team was Gavin Newsom and Kimberly Guilfoyle. And I interviewed them and I covered the case, and that's how I met them, and that's how we all became friends. The guy was convicted, by the way. The conviction was overturned by the California Supreme Court. It was tried a second time, also by Assistant Prosecutor Newsom and Assistant Prosecutor Guilfoyle, and that time he was convicted again, and the conviction stuck. I think it would be a colossal mistake for the Democrats to nominate Newsom, because the only thing more difficult to defend in America today than Joe Biden's record is Gavin Newsom's record. If you think the United States is bad, California is worse in terms of taxes, in terms of regulation, in terms of guns, in terms of abortion, in terms of free speech. It's an absolute mess, and the government is in debt, and people are leaving California in droves. As for Ron DeSantis, if you want a rather conservative place, go to Florida. But I don't think DeSantis is resonating with the voters. Why did they pick those two? Well, my friend Sean Hannity has a good nose for what he thinks people want to watch and listen to. We'll find out if he was right when we see the ratings. I did not watch.